And the answer is yes, but I mean, not because the problems are scientific, but the fact is, I mean, my most direct involvement was when I worked in the disarmament agency in Washington. The disarmament agency is a part of the United States government. It was originally set up by President Kennedy. It was supposed to be a sort of counterweight to the Department of Defense, that we would have an agency in the government fighting for peace. So the disarmament agency was created. It never has been, of course, as important as he hoped. It still exists and it's still useful, but it's not very powerful. But it certainly does help. And so I worked at the disarmament agency in the Kennedy administration, which was right at the beginning. And so at that time it was very small, but it still had a lot of influence. So we had about 100 people altogether for the whole agency. And we were, in fact, doing a lot of the negotiations with the Russians. It was the same time the test ban was being negotiated, and there was a lot of disarmament negotiations also in the United Nations. And these were all run by the disarmament agency. So we had some real contact with the real world. And what was striking to me, that in the disarmament agency there were two kinds of people. There were the diplomats and there were the scientists. And diplomats were about 90 of them. I mean, we had 100 people altogether. About 90 of us were diplomats and only 10 of us were scientists. But in some way, the scientists did much more than the diplomats. The reason being that we were accustomed to running an international operation, that science is international and always has been international. And so we have always had this ability to get along and work together with people all over the world, disregarding religion and disregarding politics and disregarding colors of skin and so on. And so we have this essentially just a network of personal friendships all over the world, and that was very helpful. So it meant the scientists at the agency knew the people in Russia, and we knew the people in China, and we could talk to them. And for the diplomats, it was much more difficult. And for them, it didn't come easily to communicate. And in addition, I think they didn't take the job as seriously as we did. A lot of them were actually just waiting to get to be an ambassador somewhere. And so it was just, for them, it was just a place to sit between two jobs. And if they had been ambassador in Finland, and then they had next time they would be ambassador in South Korea or someplace. I mean, they move around the world a lot, but they never get really to know people in the same way scientists do. So that's why scientists can be helpful. And of course, the same was true at the Pugwash meetings. The Pugwash meetings were only scientists, and we were able actually to communicate with the opposing governments through having friends who talked to them. So there was one particular Russian whom I remember very well, Pavlichenko, who was not only a Russian, he was a KGB man. He actually worked for the KGB, the secret police. And so his business was actually to be a political watchdog and make sure the Russian scientists kept in line. And so, but he was actually the one to talk to, because he had very good contacts in his own government. And so if you wanted to say something to Khrushchev, all you needed was to talk to Pavlichenko, and he would talk to Khrushchev. And so that was very helpful. So he wasn't actually a scientist, but he understood the language, and so he could talk scientific, and he could also talk to Khrushchev and whoever else was important. And I always wonder what happened to him later.